This is the Debunking Economics Podcast with Steve Keen and Phil Dobbie.
The Archives.
Episode 170. Can we afford McDonnell's 4-day week?
Welcome to the Debunking Economics Podcast with Professor Steve Keen. I'm Phil Dobbie, and today we look at the latest policy idea from the UK's Labour Party.
Will reduce the average full-time working week to 32 hours within the next decade.
It's been branded as too radical by many, but has John McDonnell got a point?
Look at the history of this. In the 1860s, people worked a 65-hour week. And thanks to past Labour governments, but actually mainly thanks to the trade union movement, by the 1970s, the average working week had been reduced to 43 hours. As society got richer, we could spend fewer hours at work. But in recent decades, progress has stalled. People in our country work some of the longest hours in Europe. And since the 1980s, the link between increasing productivity and expanded free time has been broken. It's time to put that right.
But does it make sense? The pros and cons of a 4-day working week. This week on the Debunking Economics Podcast. Yeah, it's very easy, isn't it, to dismiss this idea as just being too radical. If you heard that announcement at all, because of course everything's been lost in the Brexit noise, but that was the UK Labour Party conference in Brighton this year. Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell outlining a slew of policy ideas, including this one, reducing working hours, so that within the next decade, we'll be working a maximum of 32 hours a week with no loss of pay. And you can imagine how that's gone down with Sun readers, for example. Their comments: Labour are desperate. Labour are wrecking the economy, and this is the norm. They do it every time they get in power. Nobody who listens to this fool's speech this morning could possibly contemplate voting Labour. As a serious political party, they're finished. And companies would have to pay staff more to make up the difference and hire more staff to cover the extra day off. To afford this, companies would have to charge more, so we'd all be paying more for everything, meaning we'll have to work extra to afford it. Now, that's the Sun read. At least one had a go at trying to argue against it, but rather than just the rhetoric. But I spoke to some of my friends on this as well, Steve, and they don't get it either. Mind you, I do live in Surrey, so not exactly the hiding place for a secret Trotskyite cabal, but their view, Steve, and I think this is quite common, a bit like that Sun read. If you've got a 4-day week with no loss in wages, then that's going to add to the cost for companies. That's going to make them less competitive internationally. So that's going to be bad for Britain, unless everyone everywhere else in the world does the same thing.
Yeah, this is one of the things. When you see it happening over time, you sort of wonder, have people lost sight of what is supposed to happen with a well-functioning social system over time? And one of those things is we should all be feeling we're getting wealthier. And one element of we're being wealthier is getting more output for less time. And then you get a choice. What do you want? More? Do you want more free time or more money? And at some point, as Keynes was saying back when he wrote the, I think, Economic Prospects for Our Children. I figure that's not quite the right title, but that's the overall intent.
It's a good one. I'm going to write that book now. But I mean, yeah, it all gets down to productivity, doesn't it? I mean, we're not seeing that productivity improvement.
He imagined a 15-hour week, by pretty much when you and I are alive now, and it hasn't quite worked out that way. So that was Keynes's expectation over time, and the question is, what's gone wrong with it, and why instead of getting that, we're now getting at the other extreme. This is happening all around the world. People in developed countries are being told, we've got to push your pension age back. So it was going to be pension at 60. And now it's 65, and then it's going to be 67, and finally it's 70, meaning you don't get guaranteed state support for yourself until you're 70 years old. And isn't that a good use of state resources? No, it bloody well isn't. Because, again, if you look at people working in manual labour, and I've got my own specific experience of this right now. If I was a manual worker, I would be having a bloody hard time right now because I'm getting arthritis in my hands. I cannot form a fist with my right hand. Haven't been able to for about 6 years. I'm starting to lose the same in my left hand, which is the one I actually use, thank God, for tennis and important activities like that. But a manual worker, that'd be it. They can't do the work anymore.
Yeah. So the state will still pay. They'll have to pay. They have to pay them unemployment benefit rather than
what they get is where they're discussing things like New Start in Australia, which people up to the age of 65 are being put on what's called New Start, where they've got to be writing, it's penalising them for it. So they've got to be writing multiple job applications per week for jobs that simply don't exist in proportion to the number of old people looking for them. They'll get rejected on an ageist basis, even though they're told it isn't ageist, and they should be doing the work in the first bloody place because they've got, I literally know one of my family members has one leg. And until he turned 65, was being pushed onto New Start because they saw him as work capable. If a 64-year-old man on one leg starts walking towards you saying he wants a job in your factory, you're going to find some polite reason to deny him the position. Yeah. So it's insane.
So it is insane, isn't it, that we are sort of on the one side saying, we're going to get people working longer, and longer in terms of the week, but also longer in terms of their lifetime.
So what's gone?
And yet we want to do it the other way around. So what's gone wrong? And it does get down to that question of productivity, doesn't it? Because the reason that was given by John McDonnell was, well, if you look at the French are more productive in the UK, so they actually do in 4 days what it takes the UK to do in 5. Australia, by the way, is slightly less productive, I think, than the UK. So, boosting productivity is part of the reasoning. And in fact, some people say, well, if I only work 4 days rather than 5, I probably would achieve the same.
Well, this is where our definition of productivity brings us astray. And this comes back to my work on energy now, because I think it's ridiculous to talk about labour productivity. Okay, I think it's a ridiculous concept, because how much more productive are you than a Roman slave? Now, if I tied you to a wall and said, okay, chop down all the trees you can reach with your axe, I reckon the Roman slave would outdo you.
Yeah.
Okay, in terms of calorie capacity, and not to mention motivation, there's been no change in the physical productivity of unskilled labour since the year dot, because there's a fundamental energetic limit to humans. We, by the looks of it, we can sustain something equivalent to about 90 watts of energy, which is slightly less than the energy of an old incandescent light bulb. We can manage that for 6 to 10 hours, and that's it. That exhausts our energy capacity, and that hasn't changed over time.
Right, but we are using that energy less efficiently, clearly, because we are becoming less productive. But it is a nonsense when we start looking at things like GDP per capita and by hour work, because I'm picking up the kids later on today. I've just dropped them off, and then I've got to go. Got a whole load of stuff related to the house. Here I am talking like the housewife I am for a big chunk of the day, as well as holding down a few jobs. But all the stressful stuff actually is all the family stuff. That's not counted as part of GDP.
Well, the thing, what's actually happening is that the energy that we're consuming has increased dramatically. The energy output that we put out of that has fallen consistently, because overall, no matter how well fed you are, no matter how many lights your house has, you can't put in more than 90 watts of energy over a 8 to 10 hour period as a human labourer. What's changed is the machines we're using. It's the machines that have made us more productive, and the energy processing capability of those machines that matters. And when we measure labour productivity, what we're actually measuring is the energy throughput capability of the machines we have to the energy capability of the humans. Now, the energy capability of humans has not changed one jot, but the energy passed through the machines has changed dramatically.
But that's why we get into the argument that we're going to work less, because machines are going to do more.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what we should have been doing. In fact, two things have happened. One is that the rate at which we're improving those machines has slowed down, because we're putting more and more of our money into financial speculation rather than just speculating about building new and industrial technology and so on. And the second is the increase in, and this thing comes back to how we finance that. This is something which comes out of my own work in modelling Minsky's financial instability hypothesis. The increase in private debt has been paid for by the workers. They're getting a lower share of income. And what it means is, politically, of course, their power's gone through the floor, political power, not the joules per second they can put into working, but their political power. Yeah. And they're getting screwed. And in that situation, the capitalists who are, the bankers really, who are on the top of the whole pile, are saying that the workers have got to work harder. What really is an argument about the distribution of income going in the favour of the rentier class rather than in favour of the workers.
Yeah, they've become wage slaves. So we talked about this before. They're almost like serfs, aren't they? We're going down that road. But I mean, if you introduced a 4-day week, then one argument says, well, okay, labour costs are going to go up, prices are going to go up, people's wages don't go up by the same amount, so people are worse off. If they do go up by the same amount, then prices go up further, and then you have this upward spiral of wage push inflation. But the counter to that is what you're saying, is that actually, well, labour costs go up, so companies go, well, we still want to make the same profit margin. Maybe we need to introduce more improved productivity with more machinery and smarter and intelligent technology.
And if you take a look back at the history of the Industrial Revolution, one of the questions is, why did it begin in Scotland? And it appears that the answer is that the wage prices in Scotland were too high. Now, if you look at the spinning jenny, which is the first major invention of the textile stage of the Industrial Revolution, that was a machine which meant that rather than one person spinning one wheel to create thread out of fibre, you had initially one person turning 6 wheels. And then that became mechanised, and you had the steam section, et cetera, et cetera. Well, it turned out that the amount of work involved in designing the spinning jenny, in the very first instance, and then putting one worker onto that machine, that worker with one machine cost less than, of course, 6 workers with 6 machines. But if you went to France, that wasn't true. The wages in France were lower. And in fact, the spinning jenny would not have been a profitable invention in France, because the labour it displaced would have cost less than the machine itself. So simply wouldn't have been worth inventing the spinning jenny or even buying one in France at the time. So in that sense, high wages can be a spur to firms industrialising. And this is like a symbiotic relationship that changes over time, which is a major part of Marx's own thinking about what causes cycles in capitalism.
So this...
That when you... Yeah.
So this lack of growth in productivity is because, I think the point you're trying...
Lack of machines.
Because we're relying on humans that are not as productive as machines. Yeah. And so if we rely less on humans, and we want to rely less on humans, so why don't we just do it? So that does become an argument. In fact, you would begin to wonder, why stop at a 4-day week? Why not a 3-day week on that basis?
Yeah, and that sort of pressure says if you want to remain competitive, you've got to continue improving your technology and your machinery over time. Yeah. And there are some classic instances around the world where this has been done very effectively. It wasn't the only reason Lee Kuan Yew increased wages by 27% overnight in Singapore in 1970. When was that? 1977, I think. But it was a major factor, saying we want to become a high wage economy, a high industrial economy, and if you want to make a profit here, you can't do it on low wages. You've got to do it on technology. It also has something to do with moving Malays out of Singapore, but that was a very effective strategy at the time. And again, it implies when you look back over time. So the mistakes that people make by saying high wages cause low productivity is to imagine, first of all, that the increase in costs, because you are now paying more for your workers, is not compensated by an income because workers from other companies now spending more money on you. So that's leaving out the macro impact. And it's ignoring the competitive role in that sense between workers getting too high a share of income for capitalist liking. One response to that is to industrialise, and that's in fact what gives you an increase.
So why aren't companies doing this already? So because you look, so there's an example in New Zealand, Perpetual Guardian, which is a company that manages family trusts and like. It's in the in the finance sector. Boo! I did that for you. They trialed a 4-day week over 2 months last year, and it was studied as well by academics before and after. They found the stress levels fell 7%, life satisfaction increased 5 percentage points. The percentage of employees who felt that they could successfully manage their work-life balance went from 54% to 78%. A lot of people would look and say that's all fine, but the counter to that is, well, that's all good so long as they've still got a job at the end of it. But I mean, if they increase, it makes the point, doesn't it? If we increased mechanization or automation and use smarter technology, then people would be working less. They'd be happier. Companies that are doing that, therefore, would be getting better people. So why aren't they doing it?
Oh, but again, because it comes down to individual versus collective. The individual, you see the cost involved in doing it. The collective, is the benefit of an improved technology over time and the power distribution, this time political power inside society. And if you go back to the 1950s and 1960s, which is the golden age of capitalism, then that was also a period of rapid industrialization and a relatively high workers' share of income. Of course, lower in terms of absolute income than today, though that increase in average working class incomes in America stopped in 1973. So there's been no improvement in the last 40 years for American effective take-home pay has stagnated. It's more a political shift that people are worried about than the actual economic. And our ambition as a society should be that over time, more is done by machines, less is done by humans, and the overall standard of living rises, because capitalism is a collective private enterprise. It is not just the case that it's not just you build on the infrastructure created by the remainder of the system. And being a capitalist in America is a lot better than being a capitalist in Zimbabwe, not because American capitalists are better than Zimbabwean capitalists, but because the infrastructure that the rest of the society, both private and public, provides in America is far greater, and you're building on a far higher base.
Yeah. If I am worse off financially as a result of this, I mean, there's a difference between being well off and being financially well off, isn't there? I mean, we always tend to think in terms of money, but I gave those figures showing that people felt they had better work-life balance. And if I've got less money coming in, presumably we'd just spend less on houses. Supposing we spend 30% of our income on housing, and that's the average for people with mortgages. If income was to fall by 20% from us working one day less, then presumably we'd have 20% less to spend on mortgages. So house prices would go down. We actually wouldn't be an awful lot worse off financially, and we'd benefit, and we'd get house prices in check.
And that's a major factor. Again, if you take a look at the amount of money going to the fire sector, that's really the real parasite in capitalism isn't the workers, it's the financial sector.
Yeah.
And insurance included in that as well. It's one thing people don't realize, the term the fire sector is actually something straight out of the American national accounts. It stands for finance, insurance, and real estate. And it's a separate division of recorded the American data from the manufacturing sector and the rest of the services sector. And the growth in that sector fundamentally is where all the money is gone, and of course increasing pay, including women's liberation, meaning that women got jobs as well, and households went from one income to two income, fundamentally turned up in higher house prices.
Yeah.
It benefited
and that was actually the point I was leading to, the fact that we've gone from 10% of household spending in 1960, these are figures from the ONS in the UK, 10% of household spending in 1960 went on housing costs. That's averaged out to over 20% today. So that's average. So there's some people who are not paying any housing costs because they've paid off their mortgage, which is why it's 20%, not 30%. We've gone from 10% to 20% from 1960 to today. And of course, over that time, we've also gone from, most households now only having one income earner to having two or three. And even with that increase in the number of people, and therefore the amount of money that's coming into the household, they're still spending double the proportion of it on paying for the housing costs.
Yeah, and so what we've had is what should have been an increase in take-home pay has been an increase in the price of housing, an increase in the level of private debt, and an increase in money going to the economy's parasite, the fire sector, rather than to its engine room, the manufacturing sector.
So another benefit. And then the fact that individually we are going to be happier and also more productive. 45% of Britons reckon they'd be more productive in a 4-day week. Less time, walking and talking around the water cooler, presumably more time spent getting on with the job. And, you talk to any woman who's got kids, and they'll tell you how productive they are because they have to be to try and squeeze everything in.
Yeah, and this is the era in focusing upon, we're saying we've got to get more out of the workers. The workers already being totally screwed here. Is the diversion. It's the finance sector that's too big, and a major reason for that, of course, is too much private debt, and also that's been mainly manifest in higher house prices, which then, of course, mean higher cost of housing. So it's a great little way to argue that it's all about the workers not being productive enough, which is where we started the discussion. Is a great little way to distract from the least, not even productive, but parasitic sector, a finance sector that's too big.
Ironically, the country in Europe that is least confident that it would be more productive from a 4-day week is Norway. 28% said that they would be more productive with a 4-day week compared to 45% in the UK. The reason might be that Norway is already one of the most productive countries in the world. I'm not really quite sure why, but they've got $105 GDP per capita in 2018 compared to just over 100, for example, for the UK.
You mean 100,000?
Yeah, 100,000. So then, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I mean, the thing again, if you go to Norway, and I do that fairly regularly, it's a very industrialized economy. They very effectively use their oil surplus, partly during the world's biggest, I think it's the world's biggest sovereign fund, but they also dramatically industrialized, and so the technology that's built a lot of those offshore oil rigs is in fact Norwegian technology. So they and the level of infrastructure and so on is superb. So it's industrialized, and then the people themselves are getting the benefit of that industrialization. They've already have they haven't been as stressed out by excess work hours and increasing ages for pensions and so on as the Brits have. And of course, the other point about how hard Brits are working, and people in America and the other Anglo-Saxon countries as well, comes down to what David Graeber calls bullshit jobs. Yeah. There are a lot of people out there whose position is really to fatten up a hierarchy and make the boss above you look better, doing work that is fundamentally useless.
Well, look, I came back, having, as you know, lived in Australia for 25 years, came back to Britain. I was astonished how long it takes to get anything done in this country. So, for example, we're buying a house at the moment. It's taken 3 months so far for the Land Registry Office to pull their finger out and issue the necessary paperwork, because there's been a change in the border with the property next door. 3 months, and still we have no idea how long it's going to take. So, there's a lot of people in the UK very good at moving bits of paper around, I'd suggest. So they could be more productive, perhaps, or perhaps they would make actually, with those people, would make no difference whether they're there for 5 days or 4 days, because getting bugger all done anyway.
Yeah, and so we have this myth that everybody working in a job is productive, and like in manufacturing, and that's the way the economic theory builds its models. It presumes everybody's working in a factory. Yes, you're a number of hours attached to a machine, putting a tweezer in to make a thermostat inside an air conditioning plant. If you're not there putting the thermostats in, then the machines don't come out the other end, and there's a link between the amount of manual labor you put in and the productivity of the factory itself. But with something like about 70% or so of the workforce working in clerical jobs of one description or another, it just doesn't have the same link with physical productivity. And a lot of those jobs, as David think about 30% or 40% of people thought if they didn't do their job, the world would be a better place. So we have we have a stressed out workforce doing lots of work which is unnecessary, and because we have the wrong explanation of what labour productivity actually is, we think we're going to make them work harder to get more output. So no, we need more machinery, more technology, and share the benefits of that through shorter working hours and higher wages.
And if we did have shorter working hours, and we thought, well, and the argument is, well, okay, that's going to add to labour costs because we're going to need to employ more people to fill those hours that you're not working. That's a bit of a problem, isn't it? Because UK unemployment at the moment is at 3.8%. In the US, it's at 3.6%. If we work 20% less, we'd actually need 20% more jobs by that argument. There's no one around to do them.
Yeah, but at the same time, what we then have is a much greater impetus to let's replace those people with technology.
Exactly.
And that's what's happening. I mean, like one of my favorite examples, in the article, the paper I wrote on a note of the role of energy in production. One thing I used in that as a footnote was an example of a woman working in the example I've just given, an air conditioning factory, where her job was to insert a tweezer-like device, which is part of the thermostat for the air conditioning unit, and she did that thousands of times a day. Now, that is the classic vision of an unskilled worker. And the only question is, why haven't they put together a machine to take her place? And the reason is because it's cheaper to have her doing it than making a machine that does it. But we end up with trivial jobs coming out of that. If the higher wage, there's an impetus to then develop the machine that replaces the human that does that, and you start getting the productivity spiral, which is a large part of why capitalism has been so successful.
Yeah. And look, there's other flow-on benefits, obviously. Even if we did 4 days and still did the same number of hours, but we did it in 4 days, so we did 10 or 11-hour days, then there's arguments that actually you'd get more time to finish work in that 10 or 11 hours that you couldn't do in 7 or 8. But more importantly, less commuting time, less fuel used, less office resources per person. There's a lot of unnecessary expenditure related to the 5-day working week.
Yeah, and of course, if you go back to the early days of the Industrial Revolution, the only thing that stopped it being a 7-day working week was religious laws. So you're forced to take the Sabbath off, and then the big battle was to get one more day, and then to go from a 48-hour week to a 40-hour week, etc., etc.
Yeah,
that is the definition of a social progress.
Right. Well, we just need 3 religions that all insist on having a different day of the week off, and then
that's a great idea. Everybody should have at least 3 religions. We're giving 3 days of the week when they simply can't go to work. They've got to be back praying.
Keenism. Keenism always
and
insists. Actually, no, hell no. Starting to talk about you establishing a religion, then you're going to have a cult, and next we're going to start shooting each other. Look, I remember a 3-day week, and you won't because you went in the country, but in the UK in 1974, I was just 10 years old, but I remember it very well. It was a time when there was industrial action by the coal miners that had hit electricity supplies at the same time that OPEC had put the embargo on anyone who was supporting Israel in the Yom Kippur War. And so fuel was rationed. The supply of electricity to any commercial premises was limited to 3 days a week. So companies couldn't work any more than 3 days. We had rolling power cuts to individual households. TV went off at 10:30 each night. The street lights were normally not on. Pubs were closed. It was, as you might imagine, the recipe for the procreation of a nation, which is exactly what happened. It was so another side effect of the 4-day week, of course, could be more populations. We might get a baby boom at the end.
Well, let's say we have more contraception as well. This comes back to the real cause of what actually productivity amounts to, and that's increasing the amount of energy that we can apply to doing a particular task, and that applies to the consumer goods that we use. Electric toothbrushes have replaced manual ones, not because largely because you can put more energy against your teeth using a battery-powered toothbrush. Jackhammers have replaced the pickaxe because the jackhammer's power is far greater than the pickaxe. That is the actual increase in productivity. Right. And
But does that apply, though, if you're not doing anything? So if the human being who was doing something in a factory is now slumped in front of the TV set, then they are not using any energy for productive purposes, and they're using more energy for the TV, plus there's the energy being consumed by the machine that's doing the job that they used to be doing.
Yeah, but then what I'm saying is the availability of energy that is the real issue, and we've completely ignored that is part of economics by not understanding the role of energy until very recently, and of course it hasn't gotten in mainstream economics at all yet. But that's all our bind, because we keep on talking about growth and income and so on and so forth. The real cause of that has been an increase in energy consumption. And now, of course, we're reaching the punchline where the energy consumption itself is the threat to the viability of the planet. And we may be forced, for that reason, the one you've just mentioned, the unavailability of energy may force us to ration and force us to have that reduction in working time. So rather than getting there in a sensible fashion, typical human will be forced into it by circumstance.
Well, I do think actually, it paints an astonishing picture, doesn't it? What happened in the UK in 1974, and you'd think this would be an awful time with all those rations. But I do think actually, I was only 10, so I don't really know. But I remember my dad was around a lot more, and I suspect the prevalent mood in the country actually was, apart from look what the unions are doing to us, which wasn't good for the union movement. But on the other side, people were spending more time with their families, and so it was probably a good thing.
Yeah. And then ultimately, what I see as the ultimate situation for humanity is if we survive the ecological crisis that's approaching us, it's a world where most of us have to find things to do because we're not needed for the physical labor of production anymore. That's the only long-term sustainable situation, because that's the only only way to make humanity in the extremely long term, and I'm talking the next 10,000 years and beyond, survive, is to stop us producing waste on the planet, which means we produce our goods and services off it. That's the only long-term solution to the energy load we're putting on the biosphere. And if we do that, then you're not going to be you're not going to be commuting to an asteroid on a daily basis. That actually defeats the entire purpose. So most of us are not going to have a job. Basing income on jobs is not going to work. We have to find another way to distribute what humanity produces, ultimately while still maintaining an innovative social system. And that is the real challenge. And the direction we're going in at the moment of increasing working hours because people are doing, multiple jobs in 0 hours contracts and so on, of pushing pensions back so people are working past the point where their hands can actually even hold a manual device. That is a sick society when we need to change direction.
All right. Well, we'll leave it on that. So it seems like not an insurmountable aim then, a 4-day week. In fact, the way you've just pitched it, it seems quite moderate to say a 4-day week within 10 years.
Yeah, it'd be quite moderate but if it would require us to start industrialising again. And of course, what the UK has done in the last 30 years is let its manufacturing sector fall from 20% of GDP to 10%, and it doesn't have the capacity to make the machine tools and so on. It's not the leading edge in terms of development of new technology. That's America's taken over that mantle from Japan. It's got a lot of work to do. And that work in the meantime, but the work is directed at replacing human labour, not making human labour work longer hours.
Yeah, the other thing is, what are they going to do in Britain with their extra day a week? There's only so many national trust properties you can visit. There's it's only so many pubs you can sit at. What do you do with your extra time? But that's a question for another day. Good to talk, Steve. And we'll catch you again very soon. Thank you.
Okay, mate. Yep, bye.
As they say, answers on a postcard. What are you going to do with all this extra time? Not just making babies, hopefully, because the population can't sustain it. That's it for today. That's another Debunking Economics podcast. I'm Phil Dobbie. He's Steve Keen. Back again next week. Thanks for listening.
This is the Debunking Economics podcast with Steve Keen and Phil Dobbie.
The archives.
Episode 170. Can we afford McDonnell's 4-day week?